how to choose feed materials. Now, I listed a lot of feedstuffs, and please note that there are much more feedstuffs than the ones I listed. I just gave you a few. I've listed a lot of feedstuff, some under the category of protein, some under carbohydrates, some under minerals, and some under, and then your premix under your vitamins. But you don't have to use all the feedstuffs I mentioned. You can use 2 or 3 of each of these feedstuffs that I've mentioned. What I mean is, under carbohydrates, you can use 2 or 3. Under protein, you can use 2 or 3. Under minerals, you can use 2 or 3. But make sure that methionine, lysine is there, and then you can choose 2 of the calcium sources I mentioned, either bone meal or your limestone, or limestone and periwinkle shell, or oyster shell, whatever way you want to go about it, right? You can choose any of the 2 under calcium. Then methionine must be there, lysine must be there, vegetable salt must be there. But for your carbohydrate and your protein, you can choose 2 or 3 out of them to make your feed. So when you combine all these materials together, you can go ahead to produce your feed. There are principles that guide us when we want to choose which feedstuffs we'll put in the feed. There are 3 of them. Number 1 is the quality of the feed. So if you're going to use maize or sorghum, it will be dependent on the quality of the feed you want to make. And please note that it is almost compulsory for you to use maize for production of feed. The reason is because in your maize, there is an amino acid that is very rare that exists in your maize. So it makes maize indispensable. An absence of that amino acid could lead to poor production in your birds. Moving ahead, I was talking about quality. So when you want to produce your birds, when you want to produce your feed, you have to check the quality of what you want to produce. If you just want to feed them with anything, then you can go anyhow about it. But if you want to produce what is very qualitative, you must go for the best. So you don't choose anyhow, right? The second principle is the principle of cost. So when you are choosing your feedstuff, you have to choose a feedstuff that is within your budget. There are some feedstuff that are more expensive than the other. So if you cannot afford soybean, for instance, then you check if you can afford groundnut cake. So the things that could make you choose each of these feedstuffs, cost is part of it. So you don't just go and choose anyhow when you know it's not within your budget. And finally, you have availability of that material. That material has to be within your reach. It has to be within your locality. The reason is because if you have to source it from far, it means you spend more money in procuring those feedstuff. And we talked about cost earlier. So you look for feedstuff that are around you and make use of them, and you have your feed ready. So let's talk about crude protein. What is crude protein? Crude protein is the amount of protein in a particular feedstuff or in the feed on a general level. There are 2 types of crude protein. You have the individual crude protein and you have the total crude protein. The individual crude protein is the amount of protein in a particular feedstuff. And the total crude protein is the amount of protein in the feed itself. So in your individual crude protein, for instance, your maize, there is an amount of protein in maize. That is what we call individual crude protein, right? Now, in your wheat offal, there's an amount of crude protein inside. And how do we come about this? We carry out what we call proximate analysis in our lab, and then in the lab we get to know how many of this protein is in your maize, how many of this protein is in your fish meal, and the likes of it. Now, for your total crude protein, it's a combination of all the individual crude protein. So when you add the crude protein of maize, the crude protein of fish meal, and the rest that you used in your feed, you arrive at your total crude protein. I also want you to know that there is a total crude protein that every bird requires. So for your broiler birds, there is an amount of protein required in the feed. So when you're producing your feed, you must make sure that it is within that crude protein. What this means is that all the feedstuffs you are adding gives you a total crude protein that is required by that bird. If it's less than that, your birds will suffer. If it's more than that, your birds might also run into issues. So in the next video, you will learn how to formulate what we call ration, and in that ration you will formulate your ration based on the total crude protein of your bird that you're producing the feed for.